Hello? Okay. Hello. Well, there's more people than I expected to be here. But okay, thank you very much. My name is Ryan Sumo, and my talk is called There and Back Again, how I went from indie to corporate and going back to indie. So I wanted to start a little bit with just talking a little bit about who I am and why maybe you might find what I have to say interesting. So I am the owner of indie developer and publisher Squeaky, and here are some highlights from my career. So I was a starving freelance artist for a long time. I worked on classic indie games like Space Chem, Prison Architect, and almost Crypto the Necrodancer, which I unfortunately had to turn down. I co-founded an indie studio where we had a publisher for our first game, which was a flop. We self-published our second game, which was a success, and we also co-published another game, which was, at least for us, a great success. I've sold an IP to a big publisher, so I think that's something that not everyone gets to do, so that might be very interesting for you. Then I worked for that big publisher. They're called Paradox Interactive, up in Sweden. And then last year, or like early this year, I went back to becoming indie. So this talk is just going to be about like, oh wait, hold on, sorry, there's a screen here. It's much easier for me. Perfect. Yeah, so just to set expectations for this talk, it doesn't quite have a central theme, but I'll try to follow my career paths and ups and downs and some of the lessons I've learned from those experiences. Please keep in mind the following things. Everyone's experience is different. What happened for me may not happen for you. Some lessons are more obvious to you than others, especially given where you are in your career right now. Some lessons will contradict other lessons, and that's just how life is sometimes. The talk is going to be a mix of some like folk wisdom, common sense, and occasionally some practical business advice. So the first lesson, which is my favorite lesson, is you don't get what you don't ask for. And this is maybe the best advice I got from someone when I was younger, and I pass it on to anyone anytime I have a chance. And I like that this came from like an American guy, so like I feel like it's a very American thing to just keep asking for things and then and expecting that you'll get something positive in return. And for a long time, I think a lot of us, we stop ourselves from asking for something because we're either shy or we're worried about we're going to get a negative answer. But you'll be surprised at how often you get a yes. So as a concrete example, I had missed the deadline for IndieDevDay for having a booth, but I politely emailed the organizers asking them if there's still space available. I'd like to do a talk maybe in exchange for a booth, and luckily they said yes, and now I'm here. So second lesson is put yourself out there. Game discoverability is a very big deal these days, but your game is not the only thing that needs discoverability. So as a freelance artist, this meant making sure that I was always online, like my portfolio was there for everyone to see. And now that I'm in a new country, I'm putting myself in this position where I am like kind of presenting myself to you so that I can try to build new connections with the people here. But of course, you want to put yourself out there by doing good work and by contributing to the community. And every time you do that, you slowly build a reputation for yourself. And then going back to the first lesson, getting what you ask for starts to become a little bit easier. Embrace calculated risk-taking. The recent industry layoffs show that job security is very rare. Anything can happen, and a lot of these things are entirely out of your control. Like, it doesn't matter how good a job you do sometimes. If you keep this in mind, a lot of us, I think, have very steady jobs, and it's scary to leave those jobs for different opportunities. But if you keep in mind that it's stability is actually a very very fragile thing these days, you'll be more open to taking some risks, especially while you're younger and you have fewer responsibilities. So in my 20s, I left a steady job making UI for messaging apps to become an artist for an ex-Sega developer who wanted to make DS games. And he found me because I put myself out there with my portfolio. I don't know if anyone here still recognizes DeviantArt, but I had a DeviantArt portfolio. And the risk I took was that I was going to leave my steady job, but I had always wanted to work in games. He was willing to pay me more than I had earned before. And I was starting to make my first connections with the international game industry. So this was back in 2007. Unfortunately, in 2008, his studio ran out of money. So I was in a very bad situation. So beggars can't be choosers. This interesting picture there is Thong Girl. Thong Girl is a superhero who found an alien thong in the mall, and it lets her shoot lasers out of her butt. The reason I'm sharing this is because after I lost my job in 2008, there weren't a lot of opportunities in the Philippines, where I come from, to get a job in game development. So I took another risky decision to become a freelance video game artist. And I would take on every single job that I could because I also had a mortgage to pay for. And Thong Girl was one of the low-paying art jobs that I took to build a portfolio that I don't share a lot now, obviously, but I think in this particular case it helps illustrate my point. So success usually begets success. The first big success of my art career was called Space Chem. It's a chemical engineering game that probably not a lot of people have heard of, but it was one of the first indie games that was released on Steam that wasn't a Valve product. And by virtue of that alone, and apparently it's like crack for programmers, it sold more than 1 million copies. I got that job again by just being present on on art forums and looking at all the job ads possible, and I happened to get the job for this. Through Space Chem, it led directly to me doing the art for Prison Architect, which maybe is a little bit more familiar to some people because this is kind of old actually, but it sold 5 million copies even before it was purchased by Paradox Interactive. And it was through Prison Architect that I met the publisher of what would become my company's first game, Political Animals. So maybe it's not really a lesson, but just kind of a reflection that when success comes to you, it usually comes like in batches, or one thing will lead to another. So when you do have that success, try to take advantage of the situation that you find yourself in. Try to ride that wave as long as you can, because nothing is certain. So this was our first game as a company, Squeaky Wheel's first game as a company. It's called Political Animals. It's like an election strategy game, very loosely based on Philippine politics. And this released in 2016. We had, I think, a lot of things going for us. So we had like a front pages theme in 2016, which I keep like reiterating 2016 because it was a long time ago. Like it's now 8 years ago, and there was a lot less competition. So having front page on Steam like really means a lot. It really means a lot of eyeballs. We were working with an established indie publisher who had made politics games and had a large like mailing list or a large fan following. We were at an event in the UK called EGX, where we were chosen as one of the games of that conference. We had videos from influencers like Splattercat and the Spiffing Brit. Of course, this was like baby Splattercat, like when it was still a lot smaller, but still, we had a lot of momentum. I think we had a lot going for us. But as you can see here, it has not recouped our publisher's expenses to this day. And yeah, like I think just as a counterpoint to how success can often beget success, nothing is guaranteed, and you always need to be prepared for uh, that your next game or will be a flop. One additional lesson from this, like with regards to publishers, is I'm really glad that we spent our publisher's money instead of our money for making this game, because well, they could afford it and we couldn't. So at least, even though the game didn't make money during this period when we were developing the game, we were able to pay ourselves a salary, and we learned a lot from someone else's money, which is it's always a good thing. Sort of related to our the flop of political animals, thinking back on why it was a flop and what we could have done better. I think there is a lesson in building on what you know. One of the reasons that I wanted to make political animals after having worked on Prison Architect was, I guess there's inside me like an artist who doesn't want to just keep repeating what they're doing. They want to do something else. And so I did something completely different, which is, I think, something that you have to respect for yourself as an artist, but also take into account that it makes a lot more financial sense to kind of build on what you already have. So if we had built Academia School Simulator, which was our next game after Political Animals, it would have probably succeeded even more, because the demand for management games was much higher than like 1 year after when we had released. One of the reasons that I didn't want to build this game, Academia, right after building Prison Architect, was I didn't want people to call it a Prison Architect clone. Turns out people will call it a clone anyway, so it's one of those things that you worry about it, but you'll never kind of get away from it, so you might as well just accept it, and if that's the game that you want to build, then you should just go ahead and build that game. So in short, it's a lot safer to build off previous success instead of trying something completely new. This slide is a little bit kind of lost in here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about like direction in games, because when we were building Academia, there's an idea where if you're just a small team and you're and you're kind of in sync with each other, you don't need to do any production, you don't need to do any like goal setting. Everyone just has to work hard and you'll get to where you're going. But the reality is, if you're not a solo developer, there's even at least two of you in the team, you will need someone, one of those two people, unless you're twins or something, or you're really, really in sync, you will need someone to take direction and kind of like focus everyone else on the team. Otherwise, you will be doing a lot of work that doesn't really come together in the end. And this becomes increasingly difficult as your team size increases. So also always be careful of adding more people before it's absolutely necessary. Consistency is greater than virality. So we always want our games to go viral, obviously. But kind of going back to also building on what you know, having consistency in what you're putting out there, and increases the chances that you will have a viral hit. So one of the things that I credit our success of Academia School Simulator to is having regular devlogs. And I know that like this is not kind of as popular before because these devlogs don't really get a lot of hits. But for us, at least, what we saw was it helped to build trust with our community, especially since we were building an early access game where I think it's even worse now with early access games. There's a huge like, lack of trust from players that you're going to be able to fulfill like the commitments that you put out there. So having some sort of regular, consistent schedule where you're consistently showing your players, I'm putting something out every month. It helps build a lot of trust, so that once you finally like release a game, then it's much easier for you to kind of ask people for their money because you've already built that trust with them. So interestingly, Paradox Interactive, who bought the rights to Academia School Simulator, has a similar practice for its GSGs, or Grand Strategy Games, where they have like a regular release schedule where their base games get improvements alongside their DLCs, and they have dev diaries explaining everything. I think that consistency is one of the reasons why they have kind of captured the grand strategy game market. This is more of a sentimental kind of thing. That's my team back in the Philippines, and this was the point where I realized that I wanted to move on from my company. So by early 2021, we'd released one successful game, which is Academia School Simulator. We had like co-published and co-funded another game called Ruin Arc, which also did very well. So it kind of took people by surprise when we announced that Squeaky Wheel was going on hiatus. And what I realized after 5 years of leading the team was that I was really, really burned out because I was kind of that person like giving the direction. But on top of that, I was also the lead artist and I was like the producer and I was doing the business and marketing, and there's a lot of things that I was doing that was really, really burning me out. And well, this is also when we were entering like the time of the pandemic, so I think it was a time of reflection for everyone. And after talking with my co-founders, I realized that I kind of wanted different things for the future. So we started to make preparations for like after we released our game Academia into version 1 to start to wind things down with Squeaky Wheel and start going our separate ways. And because we had those conversations, because I knew that I wanted to move on, we were able to prepare for that and make sure that no one was like surprised or and like that all our our employees, like there were like 3 employees that we made sure that they would be taken care of and they wouldn't like have any they wouldn't struggle so much because we just suddenly decided that we were going to shut down. Selling out. So I first pitched selling the Academia School Simulator IP to Paradox when they bought Prison Architect. I think that was in 2019 or 2020. But at the time they declined. I guess there's a lot of things going on with these kinds of decisions. But when they hired me a few years later, they made another offer for the IP, and then and this time we were actually able to make the sale. And I accepted because like even before I accepted the offer from Paradox, I knew I had no plans for the game long term because like I and like my team had already moved on. And since nothing is certain and we weren't sure how much money the game was going to make us in the next few years, the real question is how much money was Paradox willing to offer us versus how much money do we think we can make in the long run, and do we take the money now versus like betting that the game will make money longer in the long run. And I think for me, it turned out quite well. I mean, the deal I think turned out quite well for us. So it wasn't just for me. Like we divided the money with my co-founders and our investors. So in terms of the amount of money for the sale, I think we were very happy. I think I do have some regrets now, but it's more to do with not having control over the game. And Paradox isn't really doing anything with the game right now. It's making them money, but it's not doing well enough for them to want to actively develop it. But as an indie developer, if I put together another team and we kept like building on top of academia, we could actually probably make a decent amount of money. But since I already sold it, then that's no longer under my control. I don't have that choice. So that's kind of the only regret I have now. But at the same time, that buyout money is what I'm using to live here in Spain while I'm not taking any income and hoping that my next game will be a success. So it's I think yeah, overall I was very happy. I'm happy with that decision. Look, always keep learning and growing. Very, I don't know, very Instagram, I know. But I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about this because of, like, to explain, like, why I was also thinking about leaving my old company. So one is I've been a long time fan of Paradox games. They were a small indie company that grew to a powerhouse, which, to be honest, that was kind of what I was hoping to do with Squeaky Wheel at the start. So I wanted to kind of have the inside track, like, oh, how do you guys do your business? And bottom line is I wanted to live in Europe. Yeah, so like I felt that I had peaked as a freelance artist. I had peaked as a small business owner. And this was the next step for me, is working for a larger organization, understanding how it works, and then maybe taking those insights away with me for whatever it was that I wanted to do next. So what did I learn while I was there? So a lot of things I learned actually was that it's not that different. Like being an indie versus working in a larger company. It's just a matter of scale. Like, so for example, resource allocation, I think, is more important than having more resources because as an indie, I think everyone here who's an indie developer feels like, oh, I wish I had more money. I wish I had more this. I wish I had more of that. If I only had this, I would be able to succeed. But the reality is, like, the work scales with the amount of resources that you have. So what I mean by that is, like, when I was, for example, creating the trailer for our game Academia School Simulator, I basically did it entirely by myself because we had a very limited budget. In a larger company, you have an in-house audio team and a budget to outsource the trailer to, but your budget is not infinite, so you still need to make the same kinds of decisions. You still need to decide, like, are we going to go with our in-house team or should we hire an orchestra? Which feels like a ridiculous decision to make as an indie, but it's just an example to show you that no matter how big you are, you still will be kind of doing the Tetris of how much money do I have versus what is actually going to make an impact for the game. Somewhat related to the previous slide is work expands to fill the time that you give it. So let's say you're pushing back the release of your game. You know something is wrong. You're not sure what it is. You have 2 months to figure it out. I guarantee you, within those 2 months, you will either find something that is wrong with the game that you have to fix, or you will find something there's going to be something new that is wrong with the game, or you will have, in the process of trying to fix things, created entirely new problems that then you have to resolve. And this is a problem with teams of any size, but again, difficulty scales up with a larger team. Something interesting that I learned is that we always kind of assume that a lower price will lead to more buyers. I think that's a common misconception. But my experience, both as an indie and in a corporation, has been that there's very little correlation between the two things. So having a lower price doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to sell more things. And there are pricing higher has quite a few positives. Low prices suggest that you're making budget games. Higher prices suggest more value, and players will need to defend their purchases. And in the end, and I think this is what's the most important thing for us, like Steam, the Steam algorithm cares more about money than it cares about units. So if you're selling more money but making fewer units, Steam is more incentivized to show your game to more people so that you can make more money and they can make more money. It doesn't matter like how many units you sell. So just to, like keep that in mind. So the important thing is, of course, like you can't just price everything at like $1,000 and expect people to think it's good value. The important thing is to align the price of your game to the perceived value that players have of it. So you look at how much do other games in your genre, like how much do they sell their games for? Maybe talk to your players also. If you already have a community, try to see what their expectations are. And you try to find like the best fit for the amount that you're asking for. So this is something interesting in an indie studio. Someone else's problem doesn't exist because you wear all the hats and every single thing is like your problem to solve because it kind of is. And sometimes this is a good thing because it builds a huge sense of responsibility for you. If you go to work for another company, like I think you become the kind of person or the kind of employee where you're willing to do anything in order to succeed, and people value that. But also like having it be someone else's problem can be a positive in sometimes. And at least from my personal experience, when I was in a larger organization, I would sometimes take initiative to do certain things which were not my job. And I ended up making it worse, like overall, but also making other people, like my colleagues, feel bad because they felt that I had taken something or had done something that was their responsibility. So something for indies to think about if ever you decide to join a larger company. So you always answer to someone else. And this is one of the things I learned from being at Paradox. In a large corporation, you always have to answer to someone else. I had to answer to my manager, who had to answer to the CEO. And even the CEO, because Paradox is a publicly traded company, has to answer to his board and to their shareholders. To contrast that to an indie where, especially me as a co-founder, you kind of only answer to your players, right? And one thing I realized about myself in the end is I don't like having to answer to anyone else. I like having that direct connection with the players and being able to take those decisions on my own. Of course, this has the negative side effect of making me very unhireable in the future, which is kind of why I went back to being indie. Well, so why I became indie again? So after 2 years at Paradox, around some really, really smart people, I felt that I learned everything I needed to do. I tried to push forward a project that would give me some more independence, so I would have to answer to less people. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and so it was obvious to me that my time at the company was done, and it was time for me to move on. And before I think I should probably explain this graphic. That's like the EU for key art, and that's me in the middle, and those are my friends at Paradox, and they sent this to me as a going away gift. Last thing is, remember the human. This is a like a Reddit philosophy or a Reddit quote that I really like. It's a little bit corny, but I really believe that you know you have to be kind to people, even though sometimes I forget to be kind myself. You should be as kind as you can to everyone you work with in the industry, whether above you or beneath you in the hierarchy. Not only because you make the world a kinder place, but the people you've interacted with in a genuine way will remember you and they'll go out of their way to help you and your career in the future. And that's it. This is the obligatory promotional slide. We're releasing Glyphica Typing Survival on October 9. Wishlist now. You can play the game in the booth. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at my email, ryan@squeakywheel.ph. Happy to take any questions by email. Whenever I'm not busy, I'm always happy to talk to other developers or maybe co-founders who have their own studio who are going through similar struggles that I have been through. Yep, and that's it. Thank you very much. I think we have time for questions. So, yeah. No hablo mucho en castellano, pero si hablas muy lento, posiblemente yo entiendo.
English is fine for me.
Es mejor, es mejor.
Thank you so much for sharing all your experience. I feel like I'm in the opposite journey. Like I've only worked corporate for 6-7 years now. So I kinda, I'm leaning towards this idea of getting into indie games. What tip or tips do you have for me if that ever happens?
Do you have a large savings account or I think
Right.
it's a calculated risk, right? Like I think why you have to think about why are you doing this? Is it to satisfy a need inside you because like you're an artist and you have something that you want to say to the world and you don't want to die before you release this game? And that's a very important thing, and that can override almost any other rationale or reason that you have. But if it's for purely financial reasons, I think it's very basic. Like you just have to do the math. Like how much money do you have right now? How big are your savings? How long is your runway? If you like, for me, for example, I have maybe a year that I can live here without working, where I'm able to survive, and then after that, maybe I have to like run back to a corporate job. So that's really the only thing that you have to think about. Like how long can you survive? Because it is very difficult to have a hit or to have a game that can sustain you as an indie.
You- I have a follow-up. I have a follow-up if nobody's asking. Okay. Would you recommend people who want to start in indie games to create their own thing or join another indie studio first?
Good question. I would say it depends. It really depends on the person and their like how much experience you have. Let's say, um, if let's say since you said that you've been in a corporate job for a long time and maybe you already have all the experience that you need, and you have an idea that you want to make a reality, then I would suggest that you start out on your own and you start finding people that maybe can support your vision. But if you're younger and you want to get more experience, you don't want to do corporate, but you still want to learn kind of the lessons that you need to learn in order to become an indie, then yeah, like joining an indie studio is a really good idea. Like I have one of our former employees actually from Squeaky Wheel, which We have a really good relationship with him. He's now in Germany. I think at some point he's probably going to want to start his own company as well. But he went through that process because he wanted to learn more. He joined our studio, and yeah, and now I'm expecting great things from him.
Hello.
Yep.
Maybe it's easy, okay? How do you recommend a talk when the narrative design director and game design thinking about different style of the same game?
Sorry, could you
How do
repeat
you
the question?
recommend talk when you have a problem because the narrative designer and the game designer are thinking about different style of the same work? Okay.
I think that goes back to like one of my slides about like the person who is giving direction. Ideally, you have that person that you like everyone in like the team agrees like okay, like this person is the person who is driving this forward. It is like their vision, and you have to decide amongst yourselves like okay, well, when it comes to these kinds of decisions, we have the discussion obviously because that's important, but at the end of the day, if there's a difference of opinion, but a decision needs to be taken forward. The worst thing is when you're like, everyone is, oh, maybe I'll do this thing and maybe I'll do this thing, and then we'll just make a mess of things. It's better to have one decision that maybe not everyone is happy with, but it is a way forward versus like having a difference in opinion that kind of becomes cancerous in the end because you just let it grow and get worse over time.
Thank you.
First of all, hi, and I wanted to ask you about if you're a totally beginner on game development, and how would you recommend to get practice? Because of course they're not going to hire you because you don't have enough experience.
Um, Good question. There's a lot of like you can join a game jam. In the first place, like, if you don't know how to code, then that's the first step. Like choose a language that you want to learn so that you can code your own games. You can join game jams. There are organizations or groups that you can join. Like for example, in Barcelona, there's a monthly meetup called Game VCN that I go to every now and then. You just get to meet people there, and you can ask them for tips because a lot of them are also kind of at the same stage, and they'll have a good idea of of how to build up that skill set.
Okay, thanks.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. That was very illuminating. What kind of advice would you have business-wise for brand new studio owners?
Um, don't scale up faster than you have to. That's one. Try to have as many people on your team with different disciplines so you're kind of well-rounded as a team. Um, uh, Sort of going back to always like the direction, like figure out who is taking that direction in the team, and have it be agreed upon between all of you that this is the person. Like it's not just they took it. It's everyone in the team is on board that this person is the person that is going to move them forward. Um, Find a publisher so that you can spend their money instead of yours. I mean, that was a very valuable lesson for me. Like, oof, I was about to say how much it was, but I shouldn't. It was a substantial amount of money that I didn't have, and being able to spend someone else's money to learn lessons is it's always a good deal for you. And I guess to add context, like there's a little bit of I think pushback now about like developers versus publishers, and do publishers really deserve this as much money as they're making? And I think that's a very specific question for each developer and each publisher. If this is going to be your first game and you've convinced someone to give you a substantial amount of money to release like your dream game, I think that's a very acceptable risk.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right. No more questions? All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, feel free to reach out.